will be having a conversation around Chinese inbound investments in the United States. And we have 4 members on our panel, and we will structure this as a conversation between the 5 of us here, with some leading questions. And we will have time for questions from you. So whenever something strikes you, please write it down and then be ready to ask the question. So we will start with a quick introduction of our panelists today. And maybe we can start with Betsy at the other end, and just hear about, you see their title and the company name on the slide, but I think it would be good to hear a one-liner about something very specific about them and their expertise that they bring to this panel.
Sure. Thank you, everyone, and thank you in particular to Dr. Gao for organizing this and inviting me to sit on this panel. My name is Betsy Turner. As you can see, I'm a partner with Martinson, Hasbrook, and Simon. And I think the way I made it onto this panel, despite the fact that I'm a labor and employment attorney, is that I have been lucky enough to guide several Chinese companies through the process of acquisitions and also starting up operations here in the U.S. So I've worked both on the labor and employment due diligence side of that, and also the post-merger integration side with a focus on workforce integration, which in many industries is the biggest challenge and one of the most important integration factors in acquisitions.
Terrific. Thank you, Betsy. Thank you.
Honored to be here. Good afternoon. I'm Sandy Chu, partner of Grant Thornton. My focus for the last over 20 years or so on just about US and China. That's all I do. I started with China tax, and then I wrote in myself to expand other than just China tax. I have been helping Chinese companies to do business in the United States in different industry and different parts of the United States. So look forward to sharing my experience with you all today.
So my name is Lucy Liu. I'm also, like Betsy, I'm also a lawyer as well. In 2009, I founded my own law firm, Lucy Liu and Associates. We primarily focus on the corporate law, immigration, business transaction, and also IP, and also litigation, immigration as well. And I came to the U.S. back in 2003 as a F1 student. So I was originally from China, from mainland China. So I'm also bilingual. I speak Mandarin as well. And today is a great opportunity for us to come here to put all the resources come here together. And we have like lawyers, we have like CPAs, we also have like government officials. So we're going to from different perspective. And also we have our clients is downstairs, like ask us a question, like have from different perspective. So we're going to share our experience so we can help each other better. Yeah. So I'm going to introduce Sabrina right now.
Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Sabrina Gel. It's my great privilege and honor to be here as one of the panelists to discuss this wonderful topic with you all. First of all, I'd like to thank Dr. Mei Gao and SAUPO for having me and my guests today all the way from China. Myself has started my journey as a special consultant to Governor's Office of Alabama on China trade and commerce since 2006. Since then, I have successfully helped locate about $1.7 billion of Chinese direct investment in the state of Alabama and hired about 400 employees. From the true experience of cross-border transactions, I learned there are great opportunities and breakdown of communication between these two great countries. So from there, I have founded exclusive business club for American and Chinese business elites, which is Club Washington. We are focused on providing the exclusive network and the resources for Chinese and U.S. business executives who want to do business across the borderlines. And I'm very honored today we also have invited over 10 Chinese members for Club Washington who are coming from Macau, Taiwan, mainland China, and Hong Kong to be here. And some of them have already got real projects they want to locate in this great city, Atlanta. So I'm excited to be with the other three lovely ladies. That looks like it's a girls' power today with all female panelists this afternoon. So I'm very happy to be with them and excited to share our expertise with you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina. So we've seen a tremendous amount of activity in terms of Chinese inbound M&A, and especially the last 2 years, 2015, 2016, have been phenomenal. Some of the major transactions that have taken place in the market include the acquisition of Legendary Entertainment, a $3.5 billion investment by Dalian Wanda, the acquisition of the GE appliance business by Haier, the acquisition of Ingram Micro by Tianhai, who also own the Carlson brands, and the acquisition of 25% of Hilton by the HNA Group. So it's been very significant. And similarly, on the other side, some really large transactions like the acquisition of KUKA AG, one of the largest robotics companies, by the Media Group, went through its own ups and downs and then finally happened. So we've seen tremendous amount of activity. So maybe we'll start with looking at some of these aspects on what drives M&A and why M&A? Because a lot of times people refer to M&A as a rose with thorns because sometimes the complexities can really get you. And so maybe I'll pass this question on to Sandy. Sandy, what are you seeing as real reasons for Chinese companies to look at M&A, especially in an unfamiliar market for many of them, which is the United States?
Based on our experience, there are a number of reasons. Maybe I just name one or two. Number one is really the investors in China looking for ways to put their money. And China, what started China wealth and growth, driven primarily by two things: stock markets, traded shares, two, real estate properties. And these two sectors has been helped a lot of populations in China become millionaires and billionaires overnight. But because of this very hot market, Chinese government have started looking into these sectors and have put some certain measures and control over it. So put it simply is that Chinese investors no longer able to put all their monies or eggs into these two sectors in China. They're looking for other more safer and better ways to put their money. So they start looking into outside of China. So not just looking for the US, it's basically globally. So number one. On the other side is Chinese government have started encouraging Chinese investors to go out to feed basically 1.3 billion of population. Chinese growing, particularly the middle market, and they're going to need a lot of help in all areas in order to produce the GDP of 6.5. In the early years was 7 point plus. So in order to sustain the GDP, the growth that they promised, the Chinese government promised the population, they need the Chinese company to go out to make investments and at the same time to learn and bring back the necessary skills and technology to the Chinese market in order to help to drive the growth and also to feed the population of 1.3 billion.
So we are seeing a transition from what used to be traditionally an acquisition that was focused on minerals and raw materials, now becoming much more broad-based. Sabrina, do you see the same thing when your clients are talking to you here? Do you see them looking for, what do you see them looking for?
I think you're absolutely right. The trend has changed. Right now, the areas for their interests are much more diversified. And my clients, when they talk to me, they're interested not only the traditional sectors such as real estate or industrials, but also sectors such as entertainment, movie, productions, as well as food and beverage businesses, consumer service areas, as well as financial investments. So I think the real estate still represents the largest part of the investment, because from the research I've done, from May of 2015 to April of 2016, Chinese buyers put in $27 billion in real estate in the United States for residential purchases. And the individual transactions for the individual housing purchase is $930,000 each, which is twice higher of other foreign investors' purchases. But that still is a core transaction. However, I think the trend is much more diversified today and continue to grow so.
Yeah, so that's really the changing complexity when you move from old industry or old type of assets like real estate, et cetera, where the complexities are less, to newer types of businesses where the complexities of due diligence, complexities of the transaction structuring, complexities of post-merger integration. It really starts challenging these buyers. What we will be looking at today are some of the aspects on the pre-transaction, transaction, as well as the post-transaction. And we will be exploring some of these issues. The first one we picked up was business and strategy. We will also look at how teams get organized, what are some of the issues in HR related, or legal, accounting, tax, and so on. So these will be some of the themes we will pick up. We've seen a tremendous amount of, you heard, tremendous amount of investment from these companies. And if you look at the variety of industries, as the panelists referred to, pretty much every industry is a candidate for M&A. So given this, there are some constraints as well, which we will come to in a while. But given this, let's take a look at how Chinese companies are structuring their transaction teams, and what do you see in terms of their usage of advisors to guide them in the US market. Maybe Betsy and Lucy, you can weigh in on this. Maybe first talk a little bit about what you see as the structure of the transaction teams from China.
About the HR team, how they build up the initiative.
Sure, yeah. The overall M&A project and maybe specifically HR.
I was thinking this really depends on how the M&A project is structured. So for example, when those Chinese company, when they purchase US company, will they purely purchase the US company and then the US company do their own management? In this case, you will not really get too much Chinese Chinese information from China to the US. So, but if the setup, the structure will become the Chinese company going to purchase the US company and then as a function of the Chinese company. In this case, it's a different story. In this case, the Chinese company would more prefer to transfer some like management team from China company to the US and then to make sure to blend the culture of the both US company and China company. I was thinking due to the facts of the how the structure of the M&A was going to be structured, and eventually the Chinese company also looking for how they're going to purchase acquire the equity in the US company. For example, if they more prefer the US company, the target company, maintain their own operation, in this case, they more prefer doing like a lower equity purchasing. But if they want to control the US company, in this case, they will do more higher equity structure. Right, minority or majority. Yeah, so this is like more what I have observed during my deal with my clients. Maybe you can have, you want?
Yeah, I wanted to touch briefly on the advisors that Chinese companies develop relationships with and use. And one thing I have seen with my Chinese clients, but in addition other Asian clients as well, Korean and Japanese, is that they want to use American advisors. They want to use people with specialties in the U.S. But there's a certain level of trust that needs to be developed with those advisors, and we see a big challenge in getting that trust developed and established before the acquisition or the new business opportunities emerge. And so what do we do to kind of help move that trust along other than time? I mean, certainly you can spend time, but I think it's perhaps events like these that really help the partnerships come together that are needed between the U.S. advisors, such as attorneys, accountants, people like Sandy, who we really need these American specialists. So I think developing partnerships through events like these is very important.
And we see, I'll come back to you. We see a mix of both state-owned enterprises as well as non-state-owned players coming into acquisitions. Do you see a qualitative difference in the way they approach transactions? Sandy, maybe you can pick this up.
It's sensitive to say, depending who's in the audience. Certainly, we have experience helping SOEs and private companies to make acquisitions in the United States. And the general experience has been that if this is SOE, typically it's the main SOEs, they tend to move things slower and many layer approval process, so that drives the process particularly long. So getting engagement done will take a long time. Getting the deal to close takes a much longer time because they have the relative level of approval process involved. As for the private company, either they're listed or not listed, they tend to move faster. And it's easier, particularly if the owners involved, then the owner can just make the decision, then they decide what to do with the transaction, buy or not buy, or any the issues that they need to deal with, they tend to move quickly. So that is we find in terms of timing, that's the key difference.
And in all these cross-border transactions, typically a lot of times acquirers try to apply their business model, their business knowledge, their understanding of how things work to a foreign market, and that ends up, giving them a lot of surprises. So with respect to Chinese acquirers, from your experience, what would you say are the most significant surprises in doing acquisitions in the United States? Sabrina, maybe you can start, and then we can see if the others have any comments.
Sure. Most of my experience actually involves with the foreign direct investments, a greenfield project.
Okay.
It's okay I share the surprises that we found during the process. Well, without naming names of one of the clients' experience, one of the biggest surprises for one of my clients who is a family business from China, and due to the reason of anti-dumping taxes, they decided to move their factory into United States to avoid the taxes, so to become made in America. And after very extensive due diligence for over 20 cities, exhausting research, they have decided to locate their plant in one of the southern states due to the concern of no union or very little union influence of their workers. However, after putting the money and after they cleared the land and built this very beautiful advanced plant and had over hundreds of employees, then the biggest surprise I found is that the employees actually formed an union. So that's to their dismay, because that's one of the reasons why they located the site there. So we have done lots of consultation to them and helped them to find, trustworthy legal advisors to solve the problem. But we think the reasons for that union's formation was due to the miscommunication between management team and the local employees. So I think that also boiled down to one of the biggest issue for Chinese investments in the United States. That is cultural difference. And it sounds too vague or too broad. It sounds also most irrelevant when you try to make a decision about investment. However, it is critical to your long-term success of your investment in the United States, because when you put your money here, you start to hire people working for you here.
Right.
Yeah, you're dealing with the cultural difference every day. So that's what I found is one of the biggest surprises to one of my clients.
Lucy, any comments on this?
For me, it's really, I do agree, do have surprise, but I'll try to say is like we really don't need to too much emphasize the difference, the surprise. Because this is really the world is flat. This is the internet. Like a lot of people really young, aggressive, really like want to get things done. So I was thinking, I'm speaking for example right now, four of us, here we're all professionals. I think as long as they can find us as connection, we can do their accounting, legal, get connection done, really, there's no surprise to them at all.
Okay.
So this really, I was really thinking more positive.
Okay.
Yes.
Same.
I think surprises many we have seen, but I share Sabrina's comments. Sometimes we find the Chinese company have not done enough homework. They may very well gone through the due diligence, but the due diligence have many types. When in particular talk about unions and legal aspect, have they done the human resources due diligence? Have they done the legal due diligence? Going back to this very first question you asked, have they involved the qualified?
You apologize, I want to speak one thing. If we talk too much due diligence, they'll get scared. They don't want to come to investment, okay? You want to attract them to come
No. But this is an educational session. The whole idea is for them to hear the real truth.
Yeah, the true matter is that we've seen cases fail or unable to identify the exposure until much later on. It costs them more
Right.
to fix than they would if they have spent enough due diligence work getting the right advisor. Now, there are many, as Betsy mentioned, China is very much still relationship-based. So when they trust somebody and they find somebody in China, they will use them to do the due diligence work or use their relationship network in the United States to do the due diligence work. But the question still remains, are those relationships that led to that advisor, are those the qualified experts for this particular task? They may be very well equipped for this type, but may not be the best fitted for this project that the Chinese company looking for. That's one. The other two is that consistently we hear that Chinese company do not concern about the price, the purchase price. So in effect, they may very well have overpaid. Our clients...
So going to that point, do you see that there's a premium that Chinese companies are paying for assets here?
Yes. It has happened. And when we deal with the Chinese company, they never really ask about how much it costs. They really focus on getting through the process. The formality that they're more centered on, getting the formality done, and they can move on and they can acquire. They're not so much into, wow, can we get this due diligence done properly to identify any risks and exposures so that we can come back to the negotiation table whether this price is really overestimated of the asset they want to buy or at the reasonable price. So overpayment is consistently we're seeing. Now, the Chinese company have a lot of funding. Many reasons. It's not that they ignorance. Chinese investors are very smart and they do their homework. But when it comes to certain assets, they really want it in order for their own certain specific business strategy, they're willing to pay a premium.
And also, I want to add one thing as well. Sandy kind of indicated that sometimes the Chinese investor will pay overpriced. But for my personal deal with my clients, like sometimes they will feel everything in the U.S. is so cheap. So it really depends on which perspective you're going to look for this. Because right in China, a lot of operation costs much higher than the U.S.
Yeah.
Land, everything operation costs much higher. So even they compare with the U.S. market, yes, it's overpriced. But compare with where they come from, China, they will feel like, okay, this is totally acceptable. We want to close the deal as soon as possible. So I just want to put up these.
Yeah, that's a great point because I think one of the reasons which is also pushing acquisitions is the fact that high-quality assets that are priced well are really not available in China. So domestic acquisition becomes very expensive, and in contrast, the acquisitions in the US seem pretty cheap. Betsy?
Yeah, Madhu, I wanted to respond to your initial question. What are the surprises that Chinese companies face here after an acquisition in the U.S.? And I have two responses to that, but first wanted to build on what Sabrina had said in terms of cultural miscommunication. And what I have seen, and this is true not only in Chinese acquisitions, but any foreign inbound acquisition, and also even U.S. on U.S. Deals, the biggest reason an integration fails is because of miscommunication. And instead of talking about stereotypes about Chinese business culture, American business culture, I'll talk about the Brits. It's one of our full-time jobs is to make fun of the Brits, of course. But I have a couple UK clients, and I'm also often under the delusion that we're speaking the same language, and that's very much not the case. And just to make my point, you may have heard the story in World War II where Winston Churchill was discussing a very important military strike with the Americans. And he brought his team together, and he brought the American team together to discuss this strike, and he said, "We've got to table this idea. We've got to table it." And it led to a very long and acrimonious argument, after which they realized they were in complete agreement on the merits of this military strike, and of course went on to execute it. And I think that's a good point to remember, because if you can't get two parties who technically speak the same language on board, think how difficult that is when you bring in a Chinese management team who may not all have the language skills they need to speak with Americans. So what do we do to prevent that? And I think you have to have a lot of effort on the front end to identify your management team who can bridge that gap. So you need somebody who lives in both worlds, and those people are not easy to find. You need someone who speaks fluent Chinese, fluent English. Some companies can do it, and they find those folks, and I'll call out one of them here is Casey Peng. It's a Chinese American by way of Malaysia, and GD Copper is one of those companies who's been lucky enough to have someone like Casey, who is American and yet speaks Chinese and can truly speak both languages, both literally and figuratively. And companies who are serious about investing here in the U.S. need to find someone like that to be able to make their operation successful. The second point, which I may talk about later on as in terms of a surprise, is simply the regulatory framework that American companies have to deal with here in the U.S. We'll talk about that later, I think, when we talk about the new administration.
Sure, okay. Yeah.
Yeah, I also want to add one comment here is, I was thinking one challenge will be the trust from different side. But when I say the trust, it's not only talk about the culture, everything. Eventually, it's more about the trust from both sides, from the buyer, from seller, from both sides of the team. Do they trust? Can the other party deliver? Are they competent enough to deliver the service, deliver the work in the same level of the quality? That's really the trust. I remember when I used to, before I show for the Boston Legal, Danny Crane and Alan Shaw. So anyway, let's talk about one big law firm in Boston. Eventually, the law firm was purchased by a group of Chinese lawyers, Chinese law firm. So had a big dramas, how the two group of lawyers they deal with each other. So eventually, still the question get back here is, I do think yes, Betsy kind of mentioned, if we have more people Chinese, like us, Casey, the shorty, smart, sexy guy here. Casey. So we know, we know Chinese culture, we know the US culture, and also have more local Americans, willing to learn more about other culture. We can always reach in the middle. So we just need to understand each other, but I always think the difference is really small, because eventually, as long as we can prove, no matter where we're from, we're both competent enough to deliver the service in a really good quality, then the trust is really easy to.
So I think finding the right balance between cultural comfort and professional competence, yes. I think that becomes truly the key for this kind of activity. Now let's kind of look at it from the other side. What is the typical reaction that you see from American companies that are acquisition targets? What kind of reaction do you see from them when they're told that they're going to be acquired, or there's an offer from a Chinese acquirer, what kind of reactions are there? What kind of fears are there? Maybe Betsy, you can start, and Sandy, you can finish that.
Sure. I'd love to start in that one. Obviously, there's a lot of fear involved, and that's true of any acquisition. I mean, I work with my American clients, and when they're being acquired, it's, will I have my job tomorrow? And that's true in any deal. When a Chinese company is involved, you not only have that fear, but if you stay, will the company be the same? And the answer in many cases will be no. And here in the U.S., we don't have a lot of institutional knowledge about Chinese business. We just don't know enough about it to even determine whether our fears are well-founded or not. In particular, if it is a government-owned buyer, I think that increases the fears. I think that there's a lot of unfortunate adverse opinions as to having a state-owned actor acquiring a company, and I'm hoping that will change. But nevertheless, that's prevalent in our society, and you do see a lot of those fears when those kinds of transactions are being considered.
Certainly, there is fear. Fear of the unknowns, fear of being the boss from somebody outside of the United States. So the fear certainly exists. And so far, the cases that we work on, the larger ones that the Chinese kept the management team in. So they did not come in and let everybody go. They kept pretty much the CEO and the top senior management team intact. That refers to insurance company they bought in Michigan, includes another robotic manufacturing company also in the nearby area. So we are very happy to see that have happened for a number of reasons, because Chinese oftentimes when they bought sizable investments like this, they don't have that kind of experience. And it is really smart for the Chinese to continue to operate as is and without changing the top management. And because due to a lot of the detail-oriented due diligence process, a lot of the company, the value of the company they are buying, a lot of to tie into the leadership, the management that put in the company. Like Betsy said, without that management team in the company, what you are buying, without they running into putting the soft skill, the leadership, knowledge, and skill set in that sector, what really the value going to be. So certainly fears exist, knowing the unknowns, but the Chinese has been pretty smart in handling it.
Okay. And that's also, I think, part of the maturity of that coming out of experience on how to let assets remain and not to disturb the value drivers inside and basically mess it up. We have two attorneys on this panel, and that's also a reflection of the amount of litigation that is there in the United States, right? So what do you see as the attitudes or comfort level in dispute resolution mechanisms that are very different in China compared to here? So whether it's mediation, arbitration, going to the courts, what do you see as the comfort level, or is there confusion in that area, or is there a preference for one kind of resolution rather than another? Lucy, you want to pick that up?
Yeah, I can, yes, no problem. So for me, I was really thinking, honestly speaking, from Chinese culture, we not be quiet, we don't want to get in trouble. In Chinese, we have one old saying, 人生发大财. Pretty much you keep quiet making money. That's the best way. And 枪打出头鸟. So if you make too much loud, you will be the first people that get executed. That's
right.
The way the Chinese way. So I'm just saying, based on my experience deal with my clients, if they come to the U.S., they're really trying to be quiet, try not to get into too much trouble, try to stay low key. And also, especially, in the U.S., if you do a litigation case, most likely hourly rate, okay? This is also kind of different from majority, like in a transaction in China. Most likely they like to pay the fixed fee. They
right.
know how much it costs will be in the hand. So I was thinking, this is like based on one of my observation. So that's Betsy, if you want to add some comments as well.
Yeah, I think the differences in the two cultures' perception of litigations are not so different. I think the Chinese and the Americans are equally offended by frivolous litigation. I think my American and Chinese clients feel exactly the same. What I think the difference is that you, as I mentioned earlier, you do not have the same kind of regulatory framework in China. So when a new Chinese company starts operations here in the U.S., I think they're shocked to find out that we have federal agencies like the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, the National Labor Relations Act, the EEOC. I can go on and on and on. We have so many federal agencies here to regulate and enforce certain statutes. And they don't have a counterpart to that in China, or at least one that's enforced to the same extent. So when they come here, these laws are all new to them, and it's a learning process. So when they get their first EEOC charge, when they get their first wage and hour lawsuit, it's a surprise and it's a learning process. And again, if they don't have a trusted advisor who can guide them through that dispute, it becomes particularly difficult.
Yeah, I want to add one more comment here. Yeah, like I mentioned, even in the U.S., there are a lot of federal government agencies regulate everything. But in the meanwhile, honestly speaking, my Chinese clients, from my observation, they're more willing to do business in the U.S. compared with China. For example, one of my clients is one public company from China, they're in the pharmaceutical business. So they kind of complain to me, it's like in China, you know what? You have a super high, a collector, account payable. And a long waiting period, 6 months, 9 months, 1 year, they don't pay. Sometimes they'll complain to me, it's like, they work really so hard. End of the year, they just collect a few more, account payable, which is not collectible. But they do like to do business in the U.S. The reason is when they do the U.S., they told me that seldom have account payable issue. They always get to pay on time, everything. So that's the reason I do have a few public clients. Even they are manufacturing back in China, but their majority sales was all done. More than 80, even 90% was sales in North America, including the U.S. as well. So that's the reason I was thinking they take us more advantage. And also, even sometimes in China, even with the lawsuit, you also have how to implement the final order. Those have issues as well. So but in the U.S. it's much better.
It's a lot easier.
In China.
Yeah, I've heard a lot about, especially for countries and companies that have less M&A experience, that one of their biggest problems is how to structure fees for advisory services, whether it is pre-transaction, during the transaction, or post-transaction. So I would be interested in hearing about your observations on
follow the guidelines like Western standards of the consultant's payment, then I think they are truly open.
It's a sign of commitment.
Yes, to commit, to invest here. For example, one of our clients, they have serious needs to invest in the U.S. So basically, they were very open to how the consultants would require for the payment and on the schedule, and they set the right budget to follow the guidelines. But for some of clients, maybe they're just in the what if stage, kind of just like testing the water. They're not seriously involved in the investment decision just yet. Then they may be more reluctant or more interested in bargaining with the consultants. However, I found they finally realized, they get the value they pay for consultants really will save them lots of money in the end.
Okay.
So for my experience, I'm really happy with my clients from China. I think they pay well, never bargain with fee, they pay on time. So I was really quite happy with my clients, okay? So I was thinking the question also depends on where you're located. So maybe if everyday living in China is a different situation, but they know I'll probably stay in the U.S. So getting to the question to them is really about the education part. How do they understand how the U.S. how to operate?
Are you saying it's a New York problem?
But in the meanwhile, it's from client side, yes, education from the client side. But in other ways, I was looking for us as a service provider. we also need to adjust a little bit as well. For example, recently I have like one thing I'm learning as well. Because when in Chinese, a lot of people use WeChat. They use WeChat to deal with business, everything. But sometimes for me, it's like in the US way, we normally phone call, we email, we respond in 1 day, kind of happy. But in WeChat, they can expect you're going to respond in 5 minutes, everything. Sometimes I'm going to go WeChat so open. So that's one day when my clients was talking to me, say, oh, Lucy, you're going to get more Chinese clients, you have to get used to the WeChat. So I was thinking this is like a one different perspective of clients. This is maybe like if we, as a US professional service provider, we want to tap to get more clients from different culture, maybe we also need to do certain adjustment from outside as well.
Yeah. We're seeing, I think, between after the record 2015 and 2016 in terms of inbound M&A, 2017 seems to be pretty soft. And there is a lot of talk about, and I just called it clouds on the horizon, but there's a lot of talk about increased regulatory scrutiny on the funds moving out of China. So there seem to be several trends that are affecting M&A now. So one, of course, is on the U.S. side itself, which is the U.S. government, has a body which looks at foreign investments coming in, and that has to be cleared. And China has the largest number of applications in front of that committee. And several of those transactions are getting stopped by the U.S. government, primarily because of security concerns. And China itself has taken a lot of steps, including the crackdown on relisting, limiting overseas funds, putting some constraints on what percentage of your assets can be outside the country, slowing down payments on approved transactions. And then, of course, the banking system itself, the easy lending seems to have gone down. And then you have, with the strengthening of the dollar, the currency issues coming up. So from your perspectives, if you were to identify the single largest hurdle for M&A from China inbound, what would you consider that to be? Each one of you can maybe just say, what is the one most important point that you...
If I had to say one thing, I think it's just the unpredictability of the trade environment and the regulatory environment right now. I think personally that fear is unfounded. I'm very optimistic about the regulatory environment after the last 8 years of the Obama administration. Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think it's only going to get better, and so I understand the perception of instability, but I think it's a great time to invest for business.
Sandy?
Chinese have put in about $109 billion since 2000 till 2016 in the United States, over 1,300 projects. So you can look at this size, this number of transactions and the deal size. They have gained a lot of experience over the last 6-7 years alone. And in 2017 and future, I'm also optimistic that it will continue. But certainly the deal quality will be better compared to the past, because China recognized that not everybody is qualified to invest overseas. So therefore, the approval process for outbound, the registration and record process will be tightened up. So therefore, the ones who can come will be sizable and will be with very high quality. Now, the one thing that we observe and will only get better is that really is the integration. Now, the integration tie back to relatively overpayment of acquisition. China has lots of money. China don't mind paying a premium because relative sense is cheaper potentially in China. But that's not the point. The point is that why they coming to the US for investment? They want to learn and they want to bring back to China. They want to acquire things they don't have in China. At the end of the day, in order for them to sustain such investment, they need to have a profit. So if they have overpaid at the beginning of the company, their ROI going to be longer if ever happens, right? So therefore, overpaying is not a problem. But why do you have to overpay when you don't have to, even though you have tons of money? So that's the key. The return of investment is very, at the end of the day, all the shareholders and the chairman wants to make money, and they want to make more money.
Yeah, getting the discipline of ROI and
Exactly.
it to that.
So therefore, the integration is very key. Buying a company, very simple. I have money, I've gone through the formality of due diligence, I can buy, close the deal. But what happened next is really essential. Who's going to run it? How it's going to integrate into the entire group? What you're going to do with the products and the services? Who's going to come in here and learn from China? How the transition will start taking place? So I think the integration post-acquisition is very key, and a lot of time we see our clients at Grant Thornton, they haven't really thought through that process. But certainly over time, it will only get better.
So it's like the success of a marriage, right? It really doesn't depend on whether it was held at the Ritz or how much you spent on it, but it really depends on what you do with it after. And the same thing applies to M&A.